Hello, it's Hushi again, and today I am going to talk about pitfalls in manga and anime, which also kind of touches on a lot of different comics and series and things like that. But it's something that I wanted to deal with specifically a couple of very popular, persistent anime series, and of course the comics that accompanied them. But this can be applicable to like webcomics, a lot of non-mainstream, non-superhero stuff, and just in general a creative kind of critique today. But of course it's going to be extemporaneous, I have no script, so let's all strap in and see what happens. So I've been playing a lot of One Piece Pirate Warriors 4 because I love the Warriors games, the Musou games. My favorite series is Musou Orochi, which is Warriors Orochi, I think, outside of Japan. Anyway, that's my favorite because it's just so neat and wondrous and whimsical in many ways, very magical, very fun. And the latest one especially has a lot of really neat stuff with the Greek gods. And I love that. I love what they did with Hades. I love what they've done with so many of the characters. Ares is also love it. I can't wait to see what they're going to do with the next one, and if they're going to do any more expansions to this one, because it is just fantastic. I'm also looking forward to any sort of expansions on Pirate Warriors 4, because it's a fun game, and I really like it a lot. But I will tell you one of the things I don't like, and I'm kind of glad that they didn't spend a lot of time in the story. You basically get to do your treasure islands, which is a lot more fun. The treasure log is, you go to these different areas to do like a particular premise, and it's one random place or another. You get a lot of randomized events, which makes it a lot of fun. In Pirate Warriors 3, that was also the big draw of the game, going to the treasure log and going into these different islands where you could engage in all kinds of fun stuff. So I really liked that a lot. But as I said, I don't care for the story because the story isn't very good. There is a premise of, well, I'm going to get One Piece and become the king of pirates. You know, it's a good, simple premise, but the world keeps getting more and more complicated, except it really doesn't. And the simple conflict is not really paid a lot of attention to, unfortunately. There's a lot of sidelining and sidetracking and side stories and gaiden, like, look at what's happening here. It doesn't matter in the whole scheme of things, but look what happened. And every time the author tries to do something that seems like it's dramatic or meaningful, it's not really dramatic or meaningful. It's usually a huge mistake and something that really doesn't change the characters, except maybe sometimes physically. I will say before, as I've said many times, don't kill off characters, especially if it serves no purpose in the greater plot. Which One Piece, its major character write-out, is one that is handled so unbelievably poorly that it really just completely turned me off ever going back to the series, because I had enjoyed the comics to some extent, like more enjoyed than not, with a few points that I had contention with, up through the Arabasta arc, where Vivi and her family are trying to stop Crocodile and Baroque Works from destroying their kingdom. That was cool, and there were some stories up to then that were pretty cool. I thought that was basically where the story peaked, was in that particular arc. I love Vivi, I love Karoo, I loved those characters. I was really interested in the whole Baroque Works setup. And I really liked Nico Robin before we knew she was, you know, not just Miss All Sunday. I liked the fact that she joined the crew. I thought she was a really interesting character, if horribly underused most of the time. But the way the story progressed, it just honestly went nowhere so much of the time. It's just like shonen manga crap. Because so much of the time it's set up exactly the same way. It turns out exactly the same way. We have the same fucking tropes of, well, you've got to somehow unlock a new power level or some shit like that. And that's fine, but it gets really boring. It's like Naruto, except Naruto had the decency to end. I mean, sure, it's still going in some form or another, but at least they put the original story to end because, god damn, that is one of the worst anime ever. The characters are really neat. That's the thing that bothers me so much about so many of these really super popular series that just get dragged out for as long as they can milk a buck out of them. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're just milking money out of them because they know they have for a while, and they know they can indefinitely as long as they get some new interesting characters and pretty colors. That's basically all they ever do. One of the best books on manga especially, but comic writing in general, and writing in general really, is Even a Monkey Can Draw Manga. And it is just a fascinating look, and a very tongue-in-cheek look, at the genre by two authors who really know what they're talking about. And they just go right through, like right down the line, by the numbers, how to fuck up a boys manga thing, just like One Piece and Naruto and Gintama and Dragon Ball, all these others that have long outstayed their welcome. But I mean, like, there you go, Gintama. At the very least, the author of Gintama avoided too terribly much melodrama, angst, and bullshit, even though that popped in quite frequently as the series went on. But he did, at the very least, avoid getting rid of characters in such a ham-fisted, stupid way as the author of One Piece, and Naruto for that matter. Lots of great characters, interesting concepts. They're gone before you even get a chance to appreciate them. That's why I've only ever really enjoyed the fighting games of Naruto, because that's basically all you need, is neat character designs, and you use ninja powers to beat each other up. That's all you really need of that universe. Similarly, really the Pirate Warriors games are all you're ever gonna need of that universe. There's just not any more to it. I did enjoy the Grand Battle games a lot. I thought those were a lot of fun. In fact, the thing that introduced me to One Piece was, I think, Grand Battle 2 on the original PS1. That was a fun one. I loved it. All the characters had just such whimsical, interesting designs that I really liked, and the uniqueness of the premise was fascinating to me. Of course, that was also set during the Arabasta arc, so you got a lot of that in the game. So I especially liked Vivi's character and, Miss Wednesday, and the fact that she made Nami tolerable, which Nico Robin doesn't manage to do all the time. I think because Robin is an adult and Nami is still basically a little asshole kid. Nami is absolutely my least favorite character in the entirety of One Piece. She's fucking awful. She's a little piece of shit. She's horrible. And they keep making her feature largely because I think the author married the voice actor of Nami, so she has to feature well, and I just really don't like that, because she's such a horrible character. She's awful. I don't really know if any sort of special side stories for her have made her more tolerable and less a horrible bitch of an asshole, but I really don't like that character. There are a lot of characters in it I don't like Kobe, for example. Like, why do you try and keep making this character seem like he is in any way redeemable, even though long before this story was completely irredeemable itself, this little shit had a moment very early on to be like an emotional bond, and he completely pissed that down his leg. We only ever see him again being a little piece of shit idiot. Like, what kind of moron wants to join the Navy when he knows that they're just gonna have to hunt down people like the kid that he befriended and became very close to? Like, what an asshole. But it keeps going on like that. There are so many asshole people, and Luffy is just an idiot. He's just an idiot. And I know they're trying to go for like the Monkey King, the Sun Wukong sort of thing, but there is a difference between like Goku in Dragon Ball, who is generally pretty innocent and generally pretty relatable most of the time, and like Naruto or Luffy, both of whom are completely insufferable at the best of times. The Marineford whole story was just shit, and it just did not get better. Some of the worst generation characters are interesting, but the ones that are most interesting are underused. And then you've got Law, who's just like, he's just a dick. Like, I know some people really like him or find him really appealing or attractive, but he's just a fucking dick most all of the time. And he's not even a character that is novel in his concept. Like, we could have had Chopper be more developed and not have Law play these parts that he does, because ultimately he's just kind of useless. He's just this extraneous presence that doesn't add much of anything to the story. And there's all these characters, even on the Straw Hat Pirates crew, that could be developed more, but aren't, in favor of assholes like Law, or Kid, or like all these other characters. Bartolomeo is one of the only ones that has any interesting qualities about him, if only because he's generally kind of likable. Like, you can at least understand where he's coming from. And he's not just like this extra piece of shit asshole all the fucking time, like so many of the other characters are. Like, what do you expect to even do with some of these former Marine generals who just decided to give it up? Like, does that make them good people now? I don't think so. The Marineford whole story arc war shit made a lot of characters completely unusable from there on out. And there's so much else that's just stupid about it. Power levels do not match up. There is no consistency with One Piece, just like there's very little consistency with Naruto, because it just got complicated, and people would learn this or train in this, or they'd suddenly have this power that would never come up again, or it's shit like that happens in One Piece all the fucking time. And when you play any of the games, which are supposed to be matched up with the series, you see how bullshit a lot of this is. Like, when you play Ace in any of the Pirate Warriors games, it's just like, yeah, there's no way any of that could happen the way it happened. Especially since it happened the worst possible way. Like, it's bad writing to try and replace a character and then give the replacement the development that that character would have had. It is terrible. It is nothing short of just atrocious to have the shit substitute character that you invented named Sabo, who basically just looks exactly like another character that's very prominent in the series, and just be like, okay, he's a replacement, and he's gonna fill that role, even though he doesn't fill that role at all, and no amount of back-building affiliations with people and acquaintances with people you know is gonna do that. Nobody is gonna believe that shit. Nobody believed it to begin with, and he's just such a lame character to do that with. At least with Ace, you had someone who was different. Even though he had a resemblance to Luffy, he was very different physically to most all of the other characters, and in design he was much, much more distinct and novel. But further than that, there's just also the horrible thing. You should never do this if you write. Never put in a time skip. And just a brief aside, when you're gonna have a time skip, don't have the shittiest resolution to a story ever just before that. That entire lengthy, really drawn out, needlessly protracted plot that leads to just a huge disappointment and a bunch of fucking idiots running around like they've got no heads. That is not good writing, and it's not satisfying. But back to the time skip. Time skips are amateur shit. Naruto did it, and One Piece should never have done it. It is so ultra garbage to put in a time skip, because that's just you saying, well, I don't know what else to do. I'm going to have some years pass or some time pass, change up the designs a little bit, maybe give them a little higher power or something, and then we'll continue the story, even though we probably should have had something to do without making time pass that much in what amounts to an advert break. So yeah, never do a time skip. And don't get caught up in that cycle of escalation. It never ends. Some of the most heartfelt, interesting stories in One Piece, and just about any series, are moments that don't necessarily happen in the big dramatic arcs. There's no reason, really, why they would have to immediately fight someone on the level of a giant organization like Baroque Works, like they did during the Arabasta arc. Why would they need to? That was a nice arc. It gave us a good climax, a good ultimate, like, last boss character, but we don't need to go right back into that. It's like when you play an RPG, for example. If any of you remember how RPGs used to be, you do fight a lot of monsters and bosses and things like that, and the end boss is usually supposed to be the most powerful, difficult, and impactful of them all. Now, of course, there are optional bosses that are more tough sometimes. I know in the Megami Tensei, the Shin Megami Tensei series, some of them are just crazy, just like obscenely difficult. But even in like Final Fantasy, there are plenty of optional bosses that are just insane to fight. At Castlevania as well. But sometimes I feel like the journey is more important than the destination. That's one of the reasons why I like Tolkien so much, even though I have trouble with some of his narrative choices. Because I really do think that a lot of the time that is much more important, and it's much more important to balance that out very well. Otherwise you get this thing that's just, well, it's a bumpy road because you're going up and up and up, and then you reach a plateau at a point because of this repeated, consistent escalation, but you just bump, 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 and it's up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, again and again and again and again. While it can work sometimes, it doesn't work in the long run. With stories like that, and I've said this before, sometimes it pays to just make them more episodic. This is why Doraemon was able to go until now. Like, it's still going. It's been going for decades. It's a show where it can have these emotional moments and funny moments, and most of it's rather light and comical, but Doraemon doesn't have to save the world every time. Doraemon does not have to manage a problem that is just like dire, like life or death every time. Sometimes it can happen, and it can be meaningful when it does happen. But it doesn't have to happen all the time, and it shouldn't happen all the time. Some of the most interesting parts of One Piece are just like those single-page pictures of what someone was doing while this story was going on. Like, it doesn't even have to have a narrative with it, really. It doesn't even have to have text with it. All it has to do is be like, okay, so this is what that guy's up to. Cool. There's a lot of creativity in the author's mind, and you can see it come out on the paper. It's just gorgeous sometimes, stunning. These massive, massive, fantastical worlds and islands, and just in general a place of wonder. But it's so miserable so much of the time because the writing is very, very bleak. And it always comes back to that because it feels like he's always trying to do a tug at the heartstrings thing or make it a big epic thing, and neither of those works if you don't have something between that. You can't just keep going with that and assume that the audience is just going to go with you. And this is why I always point to Even a Monkey Can Draw Manga, because it analyzes that and sort of dissects it, because it's something that so many of these authors don't think about, and indeed they don't have to think about, because Jump is just funding, okay, we can get money from this, we can still milk this, so let's do this, let's license this, let's keep this going as long as we possibly can, so that we can get as much money as possible out of it. It doesn't even matter what it is anymore. It's just keep the story going even though there's no story left to tell. It's like so many series where they do the same thing. Harry Potter, which I have always called Naruto basically Harry Potter with ninjas because it basically feels the same to me. And just like Harry Potter, it's a story that was drawn out far longer than it could be because the author was not good enough to indefinitely prolong a story where she just didn't have enough ideas to make that viable. And so much of that was caused by escalation. She was not satisfied with just happy, fun, magical school hijinks. But you kinda have to be if you want to let a story go on for so long. If you want to write a story that spans decades, you cannot have that kind of shit happening all the time. Sometimes you do have to focus on just humdrum whatever everyday life, and that can be the most meaningful thing ever. Bringing this all together, I think comparing it with another genre story like Yokohama Kaidashi Kikou, which is absolutely one of the greatest series of our time. Look it up if you haven't. because it is absolutely worth reading. I haven't seen the OVA yet, but the comic is just a masterpiece. It is in the Yashike genre, which is like the healing genre. And because of that, there's not a lot of like action or fighting or anything like that. Like the genre doesn't always even have conflict in its stories, at least not major conflict. And I think that's the beauty of it, and how stories like that can just continue indefinitely until the writer is ready to stop developing that particular setting and move on to another story. But when you look at especially shonen manga, especially the boys series that they try and draw out forever, you get into a lot of the same problems as you do with superhero genre, which is another genre that tends to promote unlimited scope and an unlimited run, which makes it very hard indeed to maintain any level of quality or consistency with characters that might be the same age basically, and at the same point in time for 50, 70 more years. But I hope you found this interesting. I feel like some of the same pitfalls are ones that numerous authors and creators fall into, and I've seen it happen a lot where people have a series that they grew up with and they can't look past the nostalgia, and they just remember it as something that was there, so they have an affection for it. But they can't look at it and say, okay, well, this was fun at the time, and it's fun to look back on. It's nice to still have it. It's nice that that author is still creating stuff, but it's not very good. like when I look back at some of the stuff that I enjoyed in my youth, I can definitely examine it and say, this was not very good. I enjoyed it at that time, and it still gives me some comfort to revisit it, but it really was not very good and is not very good now. I think it's an important thing for a lot of people to put time and effort and thought into their creative works, so that even if you want to try and draw something out as long as it can possibly go, which I have absolutely supported and encouraged in other videos, and I don't think it's a bad thing, but you have to know where to go and where not to go. You have to know your limitations, and you have to not get caught up in that terrible, terrible cycle of escalation and now time skips. Don't do it. But I'll see you again for another one of these videos soon. I hope you're enjoying them. Thanks for all your feedback, and if you like what I do, please do support me on Patreon. Even if you don't want to support me particularly, I do tend to have updates and links to all my stuff on my Patreon, so do check there, and all of that stuff is always free. Like public updates, public links, always free. See you later. You're welcome. Bye.